Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Great. Good. My favorite topic. Hi guys, my name's Connor. Original link to the video, top of the description, below that, link to the Discord. Click on all the buttons, except the bad one. Preemptive like, history hit, awesome channel. Causes of the War of the Roses. I know that you guys have told me that this is a sort of infamous, you got a lot of English students, history, English, I guess it's just history for you guys, don't like, and I see why. And all of the similar names, if they just had different names, it would really help me out, but let's go. Let's learn. I'm ready. I woke up. I don't have coffee, but that's fine.
It was a strange setting for a battle.
Dan?
On the 22nd of May, 1455, the narrow lanes of St. Albans echoed to the sound of war. Just over 20 miles north of London, this prosperous town found itself the setting for a vicious series of skirmishes that lasted little over an hour. But its scale belied its importance. The king himself was bloodied. Mighty nobles lay slaughtered in the gutter. The victors seized the reins of power. It was also the start of something much, much bigger. A skirmish that would sire battles of unimaginable scale. It was the start of the Wars of the Roses.
St. Albans.
The roots of the conflict stretched far back before the clash in St. Albans. Men fought and died there for a cause that was nearly a century old. A cause born out of the ambitious rivalry of royal cousins. On the 21st of June 1377, Edward III died. In his 50-year reign, he transformed medieval England into one of the most formidable military powers of war, with major victories in the early part of the Hundred Years' War against France, leading to land, castles, and the favourable Treaty of Bretigny. Edward's heir had been...
I know Agincourt and Crécy, but Poitiers, I don't really know that battle, I don't think. I gotta watch a video on it.
Castles, and the favourable Treaty of Bretigny. Edward's heir had been as brilliant as his father. But the year before, Edward, the Prince of Wales, the Black Prince, had died unexpectedly, before his father. The next heir was the prince's 10-year-old son, Richard. England, once so secure in the thrall of Plantagenet warlords, now had a boy on the throne. In the 14th century, this meant the crown was terribly vulnerable. Dominated by powerful uncles, Richard struggled to assert himself against a backdrop of renewed war with France, rebellion at home, and the dislocation of the terrible Black Death. By 1387, a group of nobles, known as the Lords Appellant, purged the royal court in what was to become known as the Merciless Parliament, wresting control from the teenage king. Richard fought back. Another truce with France strengthened his hand. By 1389, he seemed to have been back in control, but he never felt secure. And in July 1397, he decided to take revenge on the Lords Appellant through execution, exile, and the harsh imprisonment of the ringleaders. He drove his cousin Henry Bolingbroke.
What?
Another truce with France strengthened his hand. By 1389, he seemed to have been back in control, but he never felt secure. And in July 1397, he decided to take revenge on the Lords Appellant through execution, exile, and the harsh imprisonment of the ringleaders. He drove his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who was the son of his powerful, wealthy uncle John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, into exile. When Gaunt died, Richard disinherited Bolingbroke. It was a terrible mistake. Enraged and now with nothing to lose, Bolingbroke invaded England. Powerful northern lords rallied to him, and fuel was added to the flames of his ambition. By late summer of 1399, it was not just his father's lands and titles he sought, but those of his royal cousin. Richard was captured and imprisoned, conveniently dying just a few months later. Henry crowned himself Henry IV, King of England, France, and Lord of Ireland. Henry IV sat upon his throne, his son at his side, but his dynasty would never escape the taint of his usurpation. If the House of Lancaster could steal the crown, then the other branches of the Plantagenet family, such as the Duke of York, could do the same, and competing birthrights could only be settled on the battlefield.
It just seems like never-ending paranoia. Like, there's always someone who's like, oh my god, they could do that to me. And, oh my god, he has sort of a claim. Or in another scenario, oh, this guy has a claim to the throne. You got to kill him. And then, oh my god, this guy. And then it's just a never-ending cycle of paranoid wars and killing.
Henry and his House of Lancaster survived noble rebellion and Welsh revolt and looked secure. Relentless campaigning allowed him to cling to power until his death in March 1413.
His son, crowned Henry V, already an experienced soldier, looked unshakable on the throne. So much so, he launched into another round of fighting in France to finally secure the French crown his forebears had claimed, but never worn.
A series of stunning military victories, like the Battle of Agincourt in October 1415, brought Henry's dream achingly close. At the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, he won the right to succeed the French King Charles VI. Henry and his Lancastrian heirs would sit upon the throne of France. It was not to be. On the 31st of August 1422, Henry V died of dysentery, aged just 35. Just 6 weeks later, King Charles...
That's how I would have died back in the day, I just know it.
Aged just 35. Just 6 weeks later, King Charles VI of France also died. Henry's grand vision of him ruling over a union of England and France would not quite be realised. Instead, his infant son, aged just 9 months old, inherited his father's claim, but little else. England, once again, had a child on the throne. Enemies, foreign and domestic, circled.
Right back to where you were. Sorry. Okay.
Charles VI's disinherited son, the Dauphin Charles, repudiated his father's treaty now that the warlike Henry V was safely entombed in Westminster Abbey. His forces, spurred by the charismatic Joan of Arc, defeated the English at Orleans and Patay in 1429.
Sorry.
Arc defeated the English at Orleans and Patay in 1429. He cared nothing for the claim of a baby in England and crowned himself Charles VII, King of France. On the 12th of November...
Look at like the Roman style dress right there.
Himself Charles VII, King of France. On the 12th of November 1437, Henry VI came of age, King of England and nominally of France. But like Richard II before him, he'd inherited powerful uncles, scheming nobles, and the never-ending...
Guys, I like to... One of the things I really have loved about learning about history is what used to be seemed like a very long time ago. Like, I can't believe how whenever I watch stuff like footage or I learn about stuff from the early 1900s, it is now perspectively like yesterday, and it's a really joyful. Anyways, but I always like when I'm learning about something to try and picture these people. You know, just like 700 years from now, people are going to look back at now as 700 years ago, obviously. But we act as if, or we feel like we're in the future, or we're in the present, or whatever. And so did these people, and so did everyone who ever lived. And once you I try to erase all history from then to now, and just kind of like picture it of, you know, there in the 1300s, you know, it's already the 1300s, and kind of picture like what the past few hundred years before that were. You get what I mean? And it's just fun for me to think about it that way.
To the second before him, he'd inherited powerful uncles, scheming nobles, and the never-ending also French war. By the mid-1440s, the young Henry was in desperate search of a truce with France, and also a wife A French princess, Margaret of Anjou, came with a fine pedigree but no money or land. The condition was the Treaty of Tours. Henry would get a wife and breathing space, but he would have to cede Maine and Anjou to the French. His negotiators tried to keep this secret. They foresaw the rage in England that land taken with English blood on the battlefield was lost at the negotiating table for a French princess for the king. Public scorn was mirrored at court, where Henry's magnates and royal relatives jockeyed to dominate the weak king. Men like William de la Pole, the Duke of Suffolk, and Henry VI's royal cousins, Edmund, the Duke of Somerset, and Richard, the Duke of York.
I like
Suffolk
that name,
and
kind of. Edmund. I don't know why. Sorry. It doesn't beat Mehmed. Mehmed. Sorry.
The Duke of Somerset, and Richard, the Duke of York. Suffolk and Somerset were dominant figures in government. Richard, a powerful magnate, had held the position of King's Lieutenant in France.
Damn, look how cool that is. Wait, that's the Spanish one. Leon and Castile, right? And then the French and British, but then what are these for? Is that English flag, and is that the St. George Cross and something?
But he had a potentially stronger claim to the English throne.
I didn't even listen.
Richard, a powerful magnate, had held the position of King's Lieutenant in France. But he had a potentially stronger claim to the English throne than even Henry. Richard and the House of York was descended through his mother from Lionel, Duke of Clarence, who was Edward III's second son. The Lancastrian line came through John of Gaunt, who was Edward's third son. Richard of York also had a good claim through his father, who was descended from Edward III's fourth son. At this stage, York was probably not dreaming of stealing Henry's crown, but Henry's weak and vacillating rule meant the court became a cesspit of intrigue and jockeying for influence. Tension grew. In September 1447, York was dismissed from his position in France to be replaced by Somerset, and he was sent to Ireland, long the graveyard of ambitious men. Embittered York made an immediate claim for his salary and expenses, which was bad news for the cash-strapped treasury. The young Queen Margaret created further problems, siding so strongly with Suffolk and Somerset that rumours began that she was romantically attached to them. In August 1449, a frail truce with France broke down. King Charles invaded Normandy on 3 fronts. Against a woefully funded garrison and an inexperienced leader in Somerset, French forces inexorably drove the English out of northern France. It culminated in the devastating defeat at the Battle of Fourmilion, where 4,000 English soldiers were killed. For his role in the catastrophe, Suffolk was hauled before the House of Commons and put on trial for treason. But before they reached judgment, Henry intervened. He dropped the charge of treason and banished him for secondary misdemeanors. It was not a popular decision, and only served to...
Isn't the birth of the British Navy during Queen Elizabeth and Drake and the battles with the Spanish? And I always wondered why the Romans didn't have an insanely good navy, because that would enable them to completely control the Mediterranean, which they already did because they controlled everywhere around it. But it would make it much easier to transport people as fast as you can. But obviously they were connected to mainland Europe. And so a standing army could leave Italy and go on conquest. But Britain is on an island. And so really their only way, like they were kind of born with the need to have a sufficient navy. I forget what my point was. That was my point. No, I'm good. What am I talking about? I said it good.
To undermine Henry's power base. It was also in vain. Suffolk was murdered on his ship as it sailed the Channel, possibly on York's orders. In spring 1450, the people of Kent broke into open rebellion. Led by Jack Cade, this popular uprising reflected the schism.
Is this an old drawing? That's a really good drawing of that man. His face If this is really old, this is very impressive.
Led by Jack Cade, this popular uprising reflected the schism at court. Cade used an alias, John Mortimer. Mortimer had been York's uncle and was one of the sources of his royal claim. 3,000 armed men marched to Blackheath to air their grievances. Unlike Richard II, who dealt with the earlier peasants' revolt through negotiation, Henry woefully mismanaged this situation, alienating the protesters by resorting to violence. Cade inflicted an embarrassing defeat on the Royalists through an ambush at Sevenoaks. Although Cade was later defeated and killed, Henry had showed himself to be a weak and indecisive king.
I'm going back.
Alienating the protesters by resorting to violence. Cade inflicted an men marched to Blackheath to air their grievances.
I'm going back.
Royal claim. 3,000 York's uncle and was one of the sources of his royal claim. 3,000 armed men marched to Blackheath to air their grievances. Unlike Richard II, who dealt with the earlier peasants' revolt through negotiation, Henry woefully mismanaged this situation, alienating the protesters by resorting to violence. Cade inflicted an embarrassing defeat on the Royalists through an ambush at Sevenoaks. Although Cade was later defeated and killed, Henry had showed himself to be a weak and indecisive king. It was one thing to be humiliated in France, quite another in Kent. He then compounded matters further by appointing Somerset Constable of England. The man who had lost France was now responsible for holding England.
Not good.
Sensing weakness, York returned from Ireland in September. It was time to settle his debts. He sent a series of letters to the king expressing...
So, he didn't do great in print, so he failed in Kent, or whatever. So he failed in France, and then he failed in quelling something in England, and then he made the person who failed in France protector of England. Okay, that makes sense.
His loyalty, but stating that he wished to punish traitors, namely Somerset and John Kemp, the Archbishop of York. In reply, Henry sent instructions to arrest York, but instead, his cousin arrived in London with an armed force of 4,000 men in late September. He forced his way into the king's presence, demanding reform and the banishment of certain individuals. Henry agreed to a compromise. There would be changes, and they would be agreed by a new council, which would include York. But York still didn't have wide support among English nobles, and the king despised him for his vendetta against Somerset. In 1452, York launched another bid for power. It seems possible that he wanted to establish himself as the heir to the childless Henry and rid himself of Somerset, his cousin and rival claimant. He determined to bring Somerset to trial by using force if necessary. He marched to Dartford. Henry responded by moving a larger force to Blackheath. England teetered on the edge of war. It was avoided, or postponed, by York's loss of nerve. He feared defeat against the king's powerful army and suggested a rapprochement with the king as long as Somerset was arrested. The king seems to have agreed. York rode to Blackheath, but he found the hated Somerset in the king's tent. It was a trick, and York was effectively a prisoner. He was taken to St. Paul's Cathedral, where to swear a solemn oath that he would not raise an armed force against the king.
Clever.
Civil war had been avoided. For now. As so often, it would be affairs in France that threw England back into turmoil. In August 1452, the whole of the Duchy of Aquitaine fell into French hands. In July 1453, the 100 Years' War came to an end, as an English force hoping to reconquer Aquitaine was routed at the Battle of Castillon. Henry VI had lost all of his lands in France, with the exception of the toehold of Calais. Battered by this failure, Henry was also trying to manage disputes between his overmighty lords. In the north, Warwick's Neville family and the Percys were at each other's throats.
Neville, Percy, really? And Harry Potter's on right now over here? Come on.
Failure. Henry was also trying to manage disputes between his overmighty lords. In the north, Warwick's Neville family and the Percys were at each other's throats. And in July 1453, escalating foreign and domestic crises had destroyed King Henry's ability to rule, and he suffered total mental collapse. Not even the happy news that his Queen Margaret was pregnant
brought him out of his stupor. The birth of his much-needed heir, Prince Edward, came and went in October, and still the illness persisted. Henry was led from room to room, listless, uncommunicative. Who should rule England in the place of the absent king?
Wait, what?
The birth of his much-needed heir, Prince Edward, came and went in October, and still the illness persisted.
Came and went? Are you saying he died? That would have been pretty sweet, like if, or kind of beautiful, if like a birth of his son like brought him out of some weird. Did he die?
Henry was led from room to room, listless, uncommunicative. Who should rule England in the place of the absent king? Margaret attempted to assert her authority, but in February, York was reluctantly brought back into the fold and nominated as the king's lieutenant. On the 27th of March, after the Archbishop of
why do they keep saying lieutenant? Like, is lieutenant and lieutenant the same thing?
Canterbury and Chancellor
Lieutenant
died, York was appointed 7th of March, after the Archbishop of Canterbury and Chancellor died, York was appointed Protector and Chief Counsellor. York made several appointments to put his own supporters into Parliament and pursued his relentless feud with Somerset, trying and failing to have him tried for treason. Then, on Christmas Day 1454, the king was declared healthy again. His recovery would prove more disastrous than his illness. He quickly set about undoing many of York's appointments. Most important,
just like, is it Nero or Caligula, where the same freaking thing happened? It was one of the two. I think it might have been Caligula. It could have been Nero. I don't know. One of the two. Where they were really sick. Let me just say Nero, okay? It might have been Caligula. But Nero was really sick and, like, possibly could die that sick. And, like, people who are kind of his supporters are saying, like trying to, you know, trying to get on his good side. Close one. We're saying, you know, oh, I would give my life to the gods if they would just spare Nero or Caligula, whatever it was. And then Nero ended up getting better, and then he gets back in, or like he calls the people, a few of the people who said, like, I'd give my life if they would only get better, to his residence, and the people are the senators, whoever who did it, were thinking they're being invited to his house to be like praised and thanked, and they were all excited. But when they got there, Nero was like, or Caligula, voice crack. Oh, so I heard you would give your life to the gods if they were to spare me. Well, here I am. They may be better, so you know what that means. Here's a dagger, my friend.
Importantly, he restored Somerset to the position of Captain of Calais and Constable of England.
Yeah, and apparently, like, he got insanely more evil after that.
Somerset to the position of Captain of Calais and Constable of England. Henry then committed a further terrible mistake. In April 1455, he called a meeting of the council in Leicester and didn't invite York. Watching his appointments overturned, reforms undone, Somerset restored, and now excluded from this council, proud York decided to act. The king's retinue left London for Leicester on the 21st of May, but were halted by an army commanded by York at St. Albans. Internecine violence.
I feel like a beard like this could be quite helpful in battle, because obviously it's not going to do much against like a full stab wound to the neck. It's going to go through it, but it definitely doesn't offer no protection, you know, especially if it's really thick and like you have it under a helmet and it's like frayed out, kind of like a lion, you know, same concept as like a male lion, right?
Army commanded by York at St. Albans. Internecine violence. So long a spectre that stalked the land was about to become a terrible reality. England's nobility hacked, thrust, shot and slaughtered each other on the streets of St. Albans. The king tasted battle for the first time. Somerset and Percy of Northumberland were slain. Blood feuds started. King Henry himself was injured. Now the Duke of York had the king as a captive. His great rival Somerset was slain. He was made protector of England, the most powerful man in the land. York had won, but it would not last. This was a beginning. Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming
I have been subscribed. I think History Hit was created after I created my channel. Joined 2008. Jesus, maybe not. I thought so. Videos. No, oldest. Why doesn't it show oldest? That's annoying. Ooh, maybe I can find some cool other videos too. 8 months? No. Recently uploaded, and then just go to the bottom. Thanks, guys, for watching. Hope you're all doing well. If not, you'll be good soon. Don't worry. See you guys next time. Bye. But I am going to find the beginning of this. What's up? I feel like you guys are here after class. Oh, wow, 14 years ago. 7 years ago. What am I talking about? 3 years ago. I guess I was wrong. Hey, Napoleon's Battlefield. No, I'm not going to do this right now. Okay, never mind. But still, they grew super fast. Hope you're all doing well. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.